really feels marvelous, and certainly his legacy is something really important to celebrate and to keep constantly in mind. I think of all the people I've known in my life, Bob Moog was the most generous. And he was the most interested in ideas and other people's ideas. He was just an extraordinary human being. And of course, this brings all of it back. If Mimi will forgive me, I'll go back and say how I first met Bob. I've been working with an instrument called the Synket, built by Paolo Ketoff, who's an Italian, sound engineer. And I gave a number of concerts for several years around Italy, and then was invited to do one at Columbia University and various places in the United States. And so I brought it over in 1966, and always when you were transporting, especially the early synthesizers, this one had tubes. It had some transistors, but it had tubes, and things would go wrong. And I was never a technician at all. And I got here, and it just simply wasn't working right. And I didn't know what to do. And so I asked Joel Chatterby if he had any suggestions. He was a very good friend of mine. In fact, we shared an apartment for a while in Rome. And he said, well, the only person I can think of who could possibly fix this is Bob Moog, So I called him up, and I went up there, and the first person I met was his German Shepherd, Stockhausen, who came out and barked at me, but turned out to be unlike his namesake, or not namesake, what would you call it? The person he was named for. He turned out to be a very gentle, really lovable person. I guess Karl-Heinz was as well in many ways, but he was never as lovable as Bob's dog. And so Karl-Heinz, came out and welcomed me, and then I went in, and Bob was fascinated by the Synket because it was designed as a playable sound synthesizer, but one that was based on the kind of modules that were being used in electronic studios.
John, can I just ask, what year was this?
This was 1966. Okay. Yeah. And Bob spent the entire night working with me, and we got it fixed. And I'm sure there was nobody else in the world, as I say, who would have had the sympathy, the generosity, or the know-how to fix that. And then I remember he offered Ketoff a position as his head research engineer. But Ketoff didn't want to leave Italy, which one understands, And then before I left, Bob gave me, he said, what kind of unit would you like? I told him I would really like to expand the kinds of sounds I was making with the Synket. And he gave me a box divided in half, could be set up on the stage, and a keyboard with it, and a ribbon controller with it, and a pedal, to control the overall volume, and said, here, use these, take these and use these. I was just overwhelmed, at his generosity. Soon after that was over, I went back and we talked about, a synthesizer that I had sort of dreamed about that would give, I thought what was lacking in electronic music at that time was human nuance. And I really wanted a synthesizer or a keyboard, which, being a pianist, which could respond to all sorts of human nuance, so you could affect every parameter, that's a technical term from Schillinger, but aspect of music. And Bob and I talked about it, and that was the beginning of the multiple touch sensitive keyboard. And then it was years in development. I went to Indiana University in 1970, and they immediately gave us a grant to work on it. And but each time Bob would build a key, or sometimes he'd get an octave done, and there'd be a breakthrough in miniaturization. And he'd go back to the drawing board and redesign it. He was always an incredible perfectionist, you know. And because this was the space period, you know, and they were making an advance in miniaturization almost every 6 months or something. I mean, a cataclysmic advance in miniaturization. I guess cataclysmic isn't the right word, but a substantial advance in miniaturization. So we worked on it, and finally the first one of these keyboards was delivered in 1987. And it was a prototype. It didn't have the touch-sensitive plate on the side, and there weren't the dual action pedals or any of the other. A lot of the other ideas were still on the drawing board because he was concentrating on the keys themselves. But it worked very, very well. And then the whole shebang arrived. The finished product arrived in 1989. And I gave the first concert with it in 1990. But there were various things. I didn't work with it very much at that time because what had happened was the analog world had gone digital. And the digital rack mounts, you could really only affect certain kind of cliche elements of music. I mean, all the voices were set. You couldn't get into the raw material and really work with that the way you could even with the simplest, you know, kind of analog device. And of course they had vast improvements in terms of qualities of sound that could be produced and so on. But I decided to really wait until software, you know, had developed to the point, which it has certainly by this time, had developed to the point where you could really get to the core of the sound and put this incredible, these incredible sensitivities to work on different musical materials. And so we kept talking about it and kept waiting, and finally we were ready. And we talked about interfacing it with a modern computer, which has much more, you know, potential. And alas, we were going to go to what was it called? NIMI. I forget what that stands for, but something about interfacing of musical instruments or something. And we were going to that conference and to try to find a computer expert who would work with us and design the software that would work with modern computers. And after, well, you know, a week before we went, Bob called and told me, you know, that they diagnosed him with a brain tumor. So anyway, I'm talking too much. I mean,
It's okay.